Afternoon or good morning for those like Deborah connecting from the US. It's really great to have a real workshop with real people. Or technology improves so much that it's virtual in 3D or whatever, but it changes significantly. But we have also people online today, so we'll try that hybrid thing, hoping that it will work. I will not spend too much time introducing. My name is Gaëtan Masson. I'm the managing director of Beckrey Institute, which is a consulting company specialized in PV. I'm also co-chair of the European Solar Manufacturing Council, which is supporting this event. And this event is organized in the frame of the European of the Horizon 2020 project, PV impact. So we will discuss today mostly about ecolabel, ecodesign, but also about CO2 footprint and all interesting environmental elements which can modify somehow the way the industry is working, which implies the impact that it can have on industry development. I will of course mention that this is something quite expected by many actors in Europe, to have a framework that would allow, I would say, simpler competition from European competitors in the PV sector compared to other ones. Of course, it's not the only objective. Decarbonizing or simply having more sustainable products is an objective in itself. And this is what we will discuss today. So I will give the floor to Davide Polverini from the European Commission for a keynote speech about the concept of ecodesign, ecolabel, and regulations that at some point might be associated to it. And then we will have a panel discussion and a very short presentation from the two other speakers, including Deborah, who's connected. I think, Deborah, you there?
I am. Thank you very much. Yes. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So I will give the floor to Davide first, and then you, and then we will end up with the last one. Davide, the floor is yours. You have 15 minutes.
Thank you, Gaëtan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, and good afternoon or whatever to everybody. Indeed, also for me, it's the first, even if small, event in person since so much time. I have to say it sounds strange to be all here without the mask. Let's hope not to be all positive after this meeting. But so thanks for the invitation and my short presentation. And I am obviously available for any further question or comment, is related to the ongoing preparatory work which is being carried out at European Commission level for potential eco-design and energy labeling requirements for photovoltaic products. And I'll clarify in a second what we mean. We are talking very briefly of something related to the sustainable products policy of the tools which we have for regulating these products. This is a typical, even if quite old slide, showing what we normally want to show when talking about these measures. As you see here in the graph, we could imagine if there could be a graph where we could have ideally in the y-axis the number of products on the market for whatever product we are talking about, and on the x-axis their sustainability, obviously provided that we are able to quantify it. We could imagine having such a trend. As you see, when we have eco-design rules imposed on a certain product group, they really cut off the worst performing products on the market, because by means of this requirement, we give obligations on all products placed on the European Union market, so that if not compliant, they cannot be placed. Then, and with particular regard to the aspect of energy efficiency, we then have the positive effect of the energy labeling scheme. Finally, we have the best tail of the market, the niche products, or not niche, the products which can be compliant with green public procurement criteria and ecolabel, which really identify the best performers. Please take this as a photograph of the situation, which is, however, evolving. Some of you may have heard today there has been a press conference to announce the new eco-design initiative from the Commission. So that's really an evolving scenario for what concerns the tools at European Union level to regulate the sustainability of products. Again, with the next slide, we see very pictorially what can be the effect whenever we have eco-design rules. If not compliant, the products cannot be placed on the European Union market. And to do so, there are market surveillance activities typically foreseen at the level of the EU member states. The products which are compliant are those that typically are, let's say, better, if not much better, performing on aspects related to the energy efficiency. So as you can see in the image, we have a decreased bill, and this is something which we can typically measure when we evaluate the impact of the eco-design measures. And also, we have improved circularity of products. Very briefly, under eco-design, today we regulate more or less all the products, the middle and big size appliances you can find at home, washing machines, refrigerators, dishwashers, plus a number of business-to-business products. It is in this framework, next slide, please, that we started at the European Commission. Okay, this is again very briefly on what we're talking about eco-design and energy labeling. But I would go directly to the core of the discussion, because it is in this framework, I was saying, that it was, I think, late 2017, we started the European Commission a so-called preparatory study for the assessment of feasibility and relevance of regulating the photovoltaic products with these 4 legal tools I was referring to: eco-design, energy labeling, green public procurement criteria, and Ecolabels. The study was carried out by colleagues at the Commission of the Joint Research Center. So we explored in parallel all the 4 potential legal applications, let's say the 4 potential regulatory approaches. And the study concluded that it was seen as ideal to regulate the environmental impact of these products, a policy mix of the 2 legal tools which are compulsory, so again, eco-design and energy labeling, and the voluntary tools of the green public procurement. So this was the conclusion of the study. Now, for what concerns the activities in particular for which we are responsible, I'm responsible at DG Grow, we are following the preparatory work for the compulsory tools. Again, the eco-design and energy labeling. So we are actually working on the potential formulation of these requirements. This is done, I would say, in a quite transparent way. This is normally acknowledged in the preparatory process for eco-design measures. In the course of the preparatory study, we already had, if I recall correctly, 3 stakeholder meetings. We had a stakeholder meeting last year where we discussed more in detail what we are talking about, which is also shown in the next slides. First of all, what products are we talking about that would be covered by these measures? It is essentially 3 categories of products: the photovoltaic modules per se, the photovoltaic inverters, and the photovoltaic systems, which is the installations which we can have, I don't know, at home on our roof of photovoltaic products. The analysis which was carried out during the preparatory study implied, obviously, an analysis both at the level of technology, at the level of the environmental impacts, but also of the markets. And we kind of segmented the market itself into at least the division between residential, commercial, and utility, because we found some differences among these different segments. In terms of coverage, I mean, without going into the detail, but in essence, we would cover, and we would mean as photovoltaic modules, those commonly, those individual modules which are intended for the use for the PV systems for grid-connected generation of electricity. We would exclude, let's say, a bit the strange animals, if I may call like them, for instance, or small modules, or modules which are having a design integrated into a consumer electronic product. We are giving under the preparatory work special considerations, so we would cover them, but with special provisions or clarifications. The modules which already contain an embedded inverter, there are not so many, to my knowledge, understanding, but they may increase. And we are trying to see how to tackle the aspects of new technologies, new module designs that could enter into the markets. Bearing in mind, and we will see in towards the end of the presentation, that the preparatory process in itself, before regulation is finalized, entails a number of years. So in the meantime, something can change, and we have somehow to be able to tackle it. In terms of, again, of product scope, and for what concerns the inverters, as we can see in the next slide, we would basically exclude the central inverters, which can be packaged with transformers. Bearing in mind, we also have an eco-design regulation on transformers. This is what, for what concerns the inverters in scope to this measure. In the next slide, we see, I agree, I mean, it's really dense. So I presume there can be a lot of questions for each and every typology of requirements, but this gives a kind of an helicopter view of what type of requirements we are thinking for the three product categories I was referring to. So the slide is divided into two parts. So starting from the right one, which is the shortest, in terms of energy labeling, we are thinking about two labels: a label which could be potentially applicable to the module, so to the physical product, and it would accompany the module when it's being sold on the EU market, and then a so-called installer label. So a label which would be applicable for the photovoltaic installation. Then, for what concerns the potential eco-design requirements, we are working on two distinct sets for, obviously, modules and inverters. We see that for modules, we would impose, for instance, information requirements on the energy yield, an information requirement on the qualification of the long-term degradation of performance. We would impose, let's say, minimum requirements on durability expressed in compliance with the well-known reliability test foreseen under the, what is it, the 61215 testing method. We would impose mostly information requirements on circular economy aspects, in particular on repairability and recyclability. Plus, we would impose two new, potentially new categories of requirements on the quality of the manufacturing process and on the carbon footprint, about which I will talk briefly in the next slide. Similarly, we have a set of requirements for inverters. Obviously, they are specialized per product group. So there would be a quantitative requirement on the efficiency of inverters. Similarly, requirements on the durability of the inverters, on the quality assurance of the production process, on circular economy aspects, and on their smart readiness. That's a bit the picture showing all the various aspects on which we are working. Again, is really an helicopter view, and I'm open to give any clarification if needed. In the next slide, we see what is referred to for the energy labeling. In both cases, we would define, test, and work on a so-called energy efficiency index, which has been defined thanks to the work in synergy with our colleagues, again, at the Joint Research Center. There is a group of colleagues in particular with strong, deep knowledge on measurement and testing on photovoltaics. So with them, we came to the definition of this index, which would be based, by the way, on the CSR value, which comes from a recently finalized standard for photovoltaic modules. There would be also an energy efficiency index for system. And the difference in this case would be that, again, the index at module level would be something related to the module itself and qualifying the performance of the module against a reference climate. Whereas the energy efficiency index at system level would be more omnicomprehensive, also factoring in the efficiency of the inverter, some losses we can assign to model the effects of the system and the surrounding environment, and also taking into account the aspects related to installation, whether it is orientation and geographical location of the system. So these are two different labels which are aimed to act in synergy. The one for labels for the modules is aimed to give an idea again on the performance of the device and to accompany it when the product is sold. The one on the system is aimed to give a good proxy of what can be the performance of the system installed in a specific installation. In the next slide, as I was mentioning before, I just talk, no, sorry, the previous one. I just talk a bit about these two categories of requirements and conformity assessment procedures, which would represent a novelty in regulatory terms. Without, let's say, going too much into the detail, but I'm happy to do so if needed. So far, under already existing ecodesign regulations, more or less we have examples of all the requirements I've shown in the previous slide applied to other products, except for these two products, with these two types of requirements, which I show here, and which would be proposed for the first time under ecodesign, which we think are legally and technically feasible, but certainly would deserve specific discussions. The first requirement would be related to the obligation on the carbon footprint of specifically for the photovoltaic modules, and specifically refer to the manufacturing and shipping phase. We are still finalizing our analysis around the decision to be made whether to have an information requirement about these or a minimum threshold requirements. We are internally reflecting in these days and weeks. The second typology of requirement, which would again represent a novelty, is the requirement on the minimum prescribed quality, so the need of the quality control on the manufacturing process of the photovoltaic modules and inverters. Why do they represent a novelty? Well, for the topic they tackle, but also for the legal aspects. Very briefly, all ecodesign regulations, they apply again to the products at the moment of their placing on the market, as we say, which means when they are sold. You want to buy a washing machine, you go to a shopping mall, you buy it. And that's important because this is also done by market surveillance authorities through various and different procedures, member states from member states. In some cases, there are the officials which go there, even not showing themselves as officials. They buy a product, they take it, and they, for instance, test it in a laboratory. So that would be done also for the modules once we would have this kind of requirements. Obviously, requirements on the carbon footprint of the manufacturing phase and on the quality control of the manufacturing phase could be difficultly checked when the product is sold. So for this, we have to set in place a procedure of so-called conformity assessment, possibly with the use of third parties acting as kind of certifying authorities. So we are working in order to have such a framework. We are not inventing the wheel because there are already procedures foreseen in general for the EU internal market regulations, which foresee the use of this way of assessing compliance, so by means of third parties. So we would make use of these provisions applied to the specific case of these ecodesign requirements. It is easy to say in 1 minute. To enact it, it's a bit more challenging, and that's what exactly we are working on. I think we are heading towards the end. How long do we need to do so? Basically, we see here what's referred to as normally the preparatory process for an ecodesign or an energy labeling regulation. It's quite long, maybe sound quite boring. The important thing to note is that we are more or less in the first part, which is execution of the so-called impact assessment analysis, which is an analysis which we have to carry out, the Commission, whenever we propose any new type of regulation, to analyze what could be the impacts in the economic, social and environmental point of view. And also we give, again, we value the possibility of having stakeholder consultation. And we have a formal moment, it's called consultation forum meeting. The consultation forum is the consultative organ of, explicitly foreseen under the ecodesign directive. It is formed by member states, manufacturers organizations, and non-governmental organizations. We aim to convene this meeting before the end of Q2, so before summer this year. And typically 1 month before this meeting, we circulate what we call the working documents, which in fact show the possible formulations of the legal requirements that we would impose. So basically it would be like seeing what we've seen in the previous slides in terms of requirements, but on a potential legal text. So this is normally an important moment. The phases afterwards would, in our estimation, then require another year, so that we would aim to have the finalization of the process, the so-called adoption by the Commission of these regulations before the end of Q2 next year, so in the first half of next year. So this concerns the timing. Please consider that we would talk then of the finalization of the process. When we have a regulation which is adopted and then published on the official journal of the European Union, normally for what concerns ecodesign, it doesn't mean that the products have to be compliant the day after. We always give a transition time, in particular for manufacturers, to be prepared to have their products complying with the requirements of the regulation. This transition period typically varies between 12, 18 months, and it is in case by case. I think with this, this is all from my side, and yeah, thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot. It's quite comprehensive. So I assume that we will discuss about it in a few minutes. So Deborah Graham Clifford, I would like to give you the floor for a few minutes to present yourself. If you're there, the floor is yours.
I am. Thank you, Gaëtan. I appreciate that. Bear with me a moment. Gaëtan, may I ask, I'm not sure whether or not anyone has my slides.
Yes, it's coming. It's coming
Okay.
in apparently.
Thank you so much.
Okay, do you see your slides? Oh, no, it's not.
Yeah, coming up now.
Okay.
Great.
Ideal.
Thank you. Okay.
Go ahead.
So good afternoon, everybody, and thank you again, Gaëtan, for the introduction. I'm Debbie Graham Clifford. I am the Director of Global Manufacturer and Purchaser Relations with the Global Electronics Council, also known as GEC. And I'm very happy to be able to join you all today for these very timely panel discussions, and appreciate the invitation to participate. So to begin, we're in a really interesting time, right, to be involved in the solar industry. For multiple reasons. There's a great deal of activity taking place around ramping up domestic manufacturing capacity, both in the US, where I am, and of course, across the EU that we're discussing today. Whether it's an overdependence on Russian oil and gas or uncertainties around US trade tariffs potentially being skirted that we're seeing announcements about today, and just an overconcentration of solar manufacturing in China. Recent global events have shown us just how fragile our global supply chain really is. This fragility obviously is pointing us to the need to rapidly develop our domestic production capabilities. And for the event today, obviously the question was posed, are Ecolabels for PV panels a potential missing link for EU-based green PV manufacturing? So my answer to that, of course, would be a resounding yes, which I don't think should surprise anybody. And what I'd like to do, if it's okay, is just provide you with an overview of GEC's EP, Ecolabel. And of course, specifically, we're talking about the PVMI category. And most importantly, just point out for you how the use of the Ecolabel is well positioned to assist the EU at the moment in meeting your goals within the European Green Deal and the more recently proposed Repower EU Action Plan. So GEC is a mission-driven nonprofit working to create a more sustainable and just world. We're focused on supporting institutional purchasers in procuring credible, sustainable, and circular technology products and services. GEC has been in existence for over a decade as a nonprofit leveraging large-scale purchasing power, both public and private sector, and as offering consistent demand drivers for more sustainable technology. GEC owns and manages the EPEAT Ecolabel. EPEAT is a Type 1 comprehensive voluntary sustainability ecolabel. EPEAT criteria address priority impacts throughout the life cycle of a product based on an evaluation of scientific evidence and international best practices. As pointed out in the Repower EU communications accelerating the clean energy transition can't happen overnight, but I do want to stress here that the EPEAT solar category already exists today. It can be utilized now by solar purchasers and solar manufacturers to address the questions around credible sustainability in the products that they buy or the products that they make. And next slide, please. So to further support my yes answer to the ecolabel question, I've noted a few key points here, and I really would like to draw your attention to the very first bullet point here. I do think it's one of the most important things, actually, I mean, in terms of what I'm speaking about today. EPEAT is easy, very easy for purchasers to use to highlight their sustainable buying practices without having to carry that burden of doing all of the necessary due diligence on their own. In addition to the already robust EPEAT PBMI criteria consisting of 7 performance categories, and in response to market demand to further decarbonize the solar supply chain, GEC has partnered with the Ultra Low Carbon Solar Alliance, working with Enthesis on an additional ultra low carbon solar criterion for this category. And next slide. For this new additive criterion, as well as all of our criteria, I think it's important to just touch on global harmonization here. When used by enough purchasers globally, ecolabels provide a consistent set of requirements for manufacturers, which reduces supply chain transaction costs that are associated with manufacturers being responsible for meeting different requirements across different regions of the world. As of right now, the ultra low carbon criterion is expected to be approved by the end of the summer, and we fully anticipate products will be approved and available on the EPEAT registry in Q3 of this year. At the moment, we're actively working with and encouraging purchasers to begin referencing EPEAT in their procurement, their documents, their bids, and at the same time, engaging with solar industry manufacturers who want to take a leadership position and access the global market of the solar market, which is projected to exceed $300 billion by 2030. Thank you for your time.
So it was just an introduction, and once Josko will have introduced himself, I will have a question of global harmonization. So you can start preparing yourself. Josko Kester from TNO, you have the floor. I think you have also 1 or 2 slides.
I think it's there.
Okay, perfect.
I hope it's
Speak in the mic, please.
okay. Good afternoon, everybody here present in Brussels. Is the microphone on? Okay, thanks. Welcome everybody here in Brussels and also online. I hope the slide, I have just 1 slide, but quite some explanation around it. I hope it is still possible to read. Also, the details are maybe more for illustration. The point I would like to emphasize today, my name is Josko Kester. I'm from TNO in the Netherlands. We are a research organization active in, amongst others, PV sector, already for tens of years. Formerly also ECN, it's now part of TNO. So in my small introduction, I would like to emphasize the importance of innovations to make PV more sustainable. And to encourage the right innovations, we need a combination of transparency, like ecolabels that was discussed, but also mandatory minimum standards. They can, and in fact, investors also need a regulatory roadmap with clear targets for the long term, but also for the short term. On the top part of the slide, you can see several innovations that are being developed in Europe right now. In fact, they are from the Netherlands. What is needed to get those innovations to the market and to get investors to finance them? The market pressure alone, even with Ecolabels, is not sufficient. The market as such right now, it's mainly selects for high efficiency and low cost. So additionally, regulation is needed to make sure PV modules will have less impact on the environment. So therefore, the EU policies on ecodesign and energy ecolabels for PV are essential. As part of that, we need both transparency and mandatory minimum standards, at least for the carbon footprint. Transparency is provided by the energy labels, and mandatory information requirements. They can exclude cheap but unsustainable PV modules from the market. And in that way, we can create a level playing field for the European PV industry and stimulate innovation that will lower the carbon footprint of PV. In fact, that's very urgent because if we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees centigrade, the installed capacity of PV must increase hugely, but also at the same time, we must drastically reduce the carbon footprint of PV systems. At the moment, we have for the 1.5 degree target of Paris, we have 300 billion tons of CO2 left in the carbon budget, and that is equivalent to less than 8 years of the current emissions. So we have until the summer of 2029, and then if we go along this way as a world, then we will have achieved the 1.5 degrees, and anything that we emit further on above this or afterwards will add to it. So quick action and bold action is needed also in the PV industry. For that reason, mandatory minimum requirements on carbon footprints are really essential. That can create a level playing field for the European PV industry, but also it can grow the European PV manufacturing along for the whole value chain. So that is also good for the economic side of sustainability. In parallel to this, we need a regulatory roadmap with clear targets on a short and longer term, like the Fit for 55 goals that are part of the European Green Deal process, that can give investors confidence and guide the PV innovations towards a lower environmental impact. Thank you.
Thank you. Very first question to start before we coming back to the question I wanted to ask before. What about the role of technology innovation? And is technology innovation, and I'm a little bit provocative, compatible with that kind of regulations?
Sorry,
is technology innovation compatible with eco-label, eco-design?
If you have the right formulations of the eco-labels and of the eco-design regulations, then it is in fact needed to stimulate the innovation. If you have very narrow formulations on the wrong targets, then it will not help innovation, of course.
I'm asking the question because in many discussions from opponents to an eco-design scheme, there is always the question that it could limit technology innovation. And I disagree.
Yes, I don't see why either, but okay. Yeah.
That's a good point. I'm coming back to the question of global harmonization. So Davide, I would like you to comment on that. So do we need global harmonization, or will we lead to some kind of a, let's say, minimum set of requirements which will not improve anything?
Well, if I may, just let me also comment on the previous question.
Yes, of course.
Because certainly, I think that the experience also that we we have with products that have been already regulated shows that it is possible to combine the regulatory approach with innovation. There has been a study some years ago, not related to photovoltaics, but to eco-design, and to check the effects on innovation stemming from or related to eco-design rules. And it was showing that certainly, to be transparent, we cannot associate the positive effects of eco-design to disruptive innovation, rather to the continuous improvement of the incremental innovation. And there were various cases that showed that in particular then the synergy between eco-design and energy labeling was instrumental to this extent. This also brings then also the aspect of prices, that premium products are at start very costly and then they decrease. And for what concerns globalization, this is, let's say, the work we are doing at European Union level, which already per se would comprehend a vast market. We normally have, and this is part of the consultative process of eco-design, we have interaction in informal but also formal terms, because at a certain moment of the procedure, we have, as we say, to notify the measures to the WTO. We have interaction with third-party jurisdictions. So this certainly ensures that whatever we can impose is in, let's say, in line with the international agreements. Again, a study which I recall was showing actually that the effects, there were even tangible effects at global level stemming from the EU regulations. This is not generally known as the Brussels effect, but we had examples of third countries which are adopting more or less verbatim the regulations that we had done in the EU. So I think this was a good example.
I will remind the Brussels effect. Deborah, I would like you to comment on this point of the need for global standardization.
Sure. And sorry, just to be clear, Gaetan, I hope I wasn't misleading in the comment there. All I was referring to really was management of substances, which is one of our criteria areas. So looking at, chemicals of concern, right? And as any hazardous substances. So EPEAT, the EPEAT eco-label takes into account, obviously, regional differences as well. So not that it's necessary to have complete global harmonization, but again, really my point was more around some of the requirements around the management of substances. So that's all I was referring to. May I also address the question of innovation just very briefly?
So my question was mostly on global standardization. Why do you think that standards should be applied globally rather than having some local specifics? We believe in Europe in general that this might help our industry if we're setting up a standard which is more constraining. I have the feeling sometimes that the direction in which you go in the US is more the direction of labels which are not constraining, but which are pushing the customers or the investors in some direction. And I have some difficulties to imagine that we could be on the same line. So I would like to hear your arguments in favor of global standards.
So again, just to be clear, sir, I'm certainly not making the point that we need to have global standards for all of the criteria.
Okay.
That's not the point I was trying to make. Again, specifically around some of the management of substances criteria in particular is what I was referring to. EPEAT also does allow, of course, right, for regional differences. Part of the process of registering products through EPEAT, of course, you're going to be, as a manufacturer, you would be working with a conformity assurance body or CABs as we call them. So those conformity assurance bodies will work with the manufacturers to ensure that the proof that they provide to meet any of the EPEAT required criteria. Actually, there is going to be some variation there. There could be, something that, as you just mentioned, right, something that in Europe would work that may not be the same in the US, and vice versa, may not be the same in Asia. So we're certainly not prescribing, global standards that have to be met across the board. I just want to be really clear there.
Thanks. Yes, David, please.
Another point I can add to this discussion of the global standards, which I think can be interesting, is that for what concerns the assessment of compliance of ecodesign requirements, we always make reference to the so-called harmonized standards, which are standards developed by European standardization organizations. However, when these standards may be already available at international level, there are cases of direct use. And for instance, what I was showing earlier of this energy efficiency index for modules, which would be based on the CER value, the CER value comes from an IEC standard. So I think this is a good example of some international standardization method that could become, let's say, the common language to set the regulatory framework.
Now we have 5 minutes left in this session. Time goes fast. I would like to give the floor to people in the audience for questions. And I receive questions from 2 of you, which are going exactly in the same direction. So I will ask which one of you, Vincent, Bess, or Laura, would like to ask it on LED and ROS regulation. So please take a mic, and ladies first.
Hi, this is Laura Miranda from Oxford PV. Well, my question was related to the current open consultation on REACH for the LED inclusion, or the recommendation of LED inclusion, and how that kind of fit within the overall picture of eco-design and the discussion that has been happening during the last 5 years preparing this.
David.
Well, thanks for the question. What I was referring to and my presentation was in particular, again, related to this preparatory work on eco-design, which touches on the environmental aspects. If we would always, I mean, the example I always do when we can somehow think to the European policies for products is like if we should go from a linear or 2-dimensional view to a 3D dimension, in the sense that for the same product, but in different aspects and different phases of the life cycle, we have different tools. We have eco-design for what concerns sustainability aspects until the placing on the market. We have, for instance, the WE directive for what concerns the end of life. And we have then the set of legislation related to the aspects of the substances of concern, among which the one you're referring to, this REACH, where there are, I understand, some discussions. These are being dealt not directly by myself, so I cannot go into the detail, but certainly what I can ensure from our side is that being aware of the fact that quite often manufacturers placing on the market the same product have to show compliance at the same time with different pieces of legislation, we can do all our efforts not to confuse things too much. So I would see difficult, for instance, to have eco-design for PV modules also working on substances of concern, given that this is being covered already under this other piece of legislation, in particular when it's related to ongoing discussions. We have ongoing preparation of the eco-design requirements, and I understand an ongoing discussion for a material introduction or exemption under REACH. So we certainly put 2 eyes or 4 to avoid this, to avoid any overlap.
Thanks. Vincent, do you want to add something to that? Or?
I think, to be clear, maybe I've not understood clearly the question and the answer, but will this Ecolabel eco-design process will mean that solar PV panel will now adopt the REACH and EuroHS regulation to remove hazardous substances in the manufacturing process? So to say, will that be compulsory for PV manufacturer not to use any lead, for instance, that could have an impact on Earth? The
direct reply is they are totally unrelated, in the sense that one thing is the legal obligations which may stem from an eco-design regulation on photovoltaic modules that would have that kind of requirements I was discussing. Another thing is the legal obligation that could stem from another legal act, namely the REACH. So they would insist, and I'm still using the conditional because in both cases it's ongoing discussions, they would insist on the same product, but they would not be related. So we would never enforce rich requirements under eco-design and vice versa.
I don't want to destroy completely the agenda, so I will give the three of you 1 minute to conclude on what you want. Deborah first.
Thank you, Gaëtan. So again, thank you everybody for the, for your attention today, your time. I'm more than happy to address any questions with regard to EP, to the eco label and the PVMI category. The ultra low carbon solar criterion, as I mentioned, should be released later this year, which I know is something that a lot of the manufacturers that we've been in discussions with are waiting for, right, to move forward. So we're looking forward to that being released. Again, just feel free to contact me if I can address any further questions.
Thank you very much. I remind that even if we are here physically, you can send questions to Deborah online or to any other speaker. So we try to use the best of both worlds. Josko.
Okay, I would like to repeat that a regulatory roadmap is needed for investors to invest in innovative technologies. And I would invite the European Commission to look how that could fit into the eco-design process, to not only have requirements now, but also to have an agenda for requirements in a couple of years.
Thank you. Davide?
From my side, I understand that many of you are manufacturers from manufacturing organizations, research institutes. You have already many things in your agenda, I suppose, but please do keep the time for following the preparatory process for potential regulations, because as I always say, if you have comments, if it's much better to receive them early than late. The closer we go to the finalization of the process, the more difficult it is to make changes. Whereas all early comments, all comments are much more appreciated. In particular, if we convene this consultation forum meeting where there will be manufacturers organizations, standardization organizations, I think it will be a chance to really check in detail what we are proposing, what we are working on, and provide comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just before we thank the three of you, I remind that ESMC is a working group dedicated to the subject. So if you want to input that working group, sometimes it's easier to collect all information, compact it, rather than sending 255 different comments to European Commission. So I would like to thank the three of you. I think we could have discussed much longer about the subject. And I hope that when we will discuss it next time, maybe in 1 year, we will see definitively progresses. Thanks a lot. And session 2 starts immediately.
So let's start, because I think we have a very tight schedule. So it's an honor to let's say, chair this panel now. So with us, we have, let's say, several representatives of the value chain across the module manufacturing industry. Let me start with the material. So we have Carsten from Norsan. So he is the BDO, or the Business Development Officer for the company. Then we have the module that is represented by Vincent from Photobot. He's the CEO. And then we have someone that is closing and opening again the cycle, that is Rossi, Antoine from Rossi, that is doing recycling of modules. So I will just give you the floor, because it's better we hear you than hearing me. So please, if you start, Carsten, as you are the initial of the...
I can start introducing myself. My name is Carsten Rohr. I'm Chief Commercial Officer in Norsan. I'm also co-chair of the European Solar Manufacturing Council. And I'm going to talk a little bit about sustainable production in Europe from an industrial perspective, and from our specific perspective from premium ingot and wafer production from Norsan. So the next slide is a short introduction to Norsan. We are based in Norway, headquarters in Oslo, and production facility in Årdal. You can see a picture, aerial view of the place. We are producing premium ingot and wafers, silicon ingot and wafers. On the right, you can see the positioning in the value chain. And through our location in particular, we have the advantage of having access to hydropower, which is, of course, in principle, cheap and clean, and also access to plenty of cooling water, which reduces the energy consumption as well in addition. So we have a very low CO2 footprint where we are. So if we look at the next slide, that provides certain competitive advantages that are principally very well aligned with manufacturing in Europe in general. So we have in Europe very good support by world-leading research institutes. That is an important competitive advantage. We have expertise through that on high efficiency N-type material, and that's of course seen as the next generation PV technology. On the right, illustrated by a graph from the ITRPV, where the orange is increasing in market share. Then we have a strong and increasing focus on sustainability. That's also shown through for example, the environmental, social, and corporate governance reporting, but a more particular environmental and CO2 footprint, which is comparatively low when producing in Europe compared to other parts of the world. And to the bottom right, there's just an illustration of a typical Chinese value chain module compared to what a European module could look like, with including innovation, high efficiency module with a very low CO2 footprint. And then we have, of course, as part of environmental aspects, recyclability and also circular economy, which are important elements and driving the market in Europe increasingly. In addition to that, there's social and labor standards. We have, of course, high standards in Europe, and obviously we do not tolerate any components potentially being made with forced labor, and that issues come rising up the agenda in the last year in particular, with respect to allegations of forced labor in the Xinjiang province in China. So with all that, of course, there is what we've been discussing, the strategic importance of producing in Europe. And that's being emphasized, of course, also in recent developments, both in terms of the pandemic, but more recently, obviously, the war in Ukraine, which puts into focus the supply chain issues, and that it is important to get away from dependence, not just fossil fuel dependence from Russia, but also more broadly import dependence from China in particular when it comes to solar PV modules. On the next slide, these advantages that we have in Europe, in particular high environmental and social standards, that should not be a competitive disadvantage, clearly, and sustainability in production, quite the opposite, should be credited. And there are various tools to do that, and we have discussed some of them already. But I want to mention first of all the policies that are already in place that promote sustainability. And one thing that we have been working on and initiated the development of an environmental product declaration together with the Norwegian Solar Energy Cluster, for example, and other players. So that's the EPD PCR, and that's been established, and that's being used among others in the construction industry, and also being started to be used to set minimum standards for example, CO2 footprint. But of course, that could be used much more broadly, and that's one tool that can be used in other circumstances as well. And then we have the PV, the French PV tenders, of course, and that's been established for many years now, and that's been leading in terms of policies for supporting CO2 footprint. And we see that now in Korea as well, a similar system. So that's been really a driver for low CO2 footprint markets. On the next page, two policy tools that we just heard about that are under development, the ecodesign and energy labeling. So I'm not going to go into much detail there. As part of the policy process, the European Solar Manufacturing Council, together with other industry associations, have contributed an expert input paper to that process, and we continue to cooperate, of course, and put our views forward in that process. Also, the GEC we just heard about, EPIT label through the Ultra Low Carbon Solar Alliance. We helped to initiate that process, and that should come in place during this year. So what I would like to emphasize is that we do want to see strong and reliable tools, requirements for environmental and CO2 footprint, because that supports also European production and manufacturing. And at the same time, they need to be simple enough so that it avoids cheating, the potential for cheating. And it needs to have verification, strong verification for the same end. So I think I'll probably stop here, and we can have more time for discussion.
I appreciate that because we are short on time. So next one will be Vincent. So the floor is for yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm Vincent Bess. I'm the CEO of Photowatt. Photowatt is a small French company, but Photowatt is the oldest PV manufacturer in the world, still in operation. We started more than 40 years ago, and we are fully integrated. We used to be fully integrated in production. We are now fully integrated in R&D more than in production, because we start with ingoting, briquetting, wafering, celluling, and moduling. We only do 100 megawatt production in France, just because it's, for us, unsustainable, economically speaking, to do more, because we have to, in front of us, we have this fierce competition. It has been the case over the last 15 years, where the manufacturing battle with China has been lost for Europe, and China is so dominant today that we need, at a European level, to find hopes and ways to restart this industry, and we need to recover our energetical independence, and solar can be a part of the solution. We all understand that to use air conditioning in summertime, it would be much better to have solar panel producing electricity on the same time that we switch on air conditioning than using gas coming from elsewhere. I ask you the question whether solar panel will be now forced to respect the REACH CE regulation, or the fact that we can't use hazardous substances in the manufacturing process of a solar panel, is just because we need to build competitive advantages. C2 content has been developed in France under the leadership of Photowatt 10 years ago, because in France, we may like it or not, but we have nuclear power. So we have a very low level of C2 in our electricity mix. So compared to competition everywhere in the world, it means that manufacturer in Norway or manufacturer in France have a CO2 competitive advantage. And if we can give a price to that, it means that we can compete with others that have other competitive advantage that can be lower labor forces, for instance, better access to financing. So every country is playing with its competitive advantage. But in Europe, we have very few competitive advantages. CO2 is one of them, but also our regulation at the EU level, that's also translate the values we have and in what we believe and in what we don't want to see in our market or what we want to see in our markets. So this RoHS hazardous substance regulation that protect customer from children to eat lead when they buy a toy, for some reason, historical reason, prevents solar panel to respect that. At Photowatt 10 years ago, we used to have printing past. We use past on cells to make the connection, and lead was inside this past. And operators, when they were coming back home, they had past on their hands, so they put them in their pockets. And when they came back home, they were having lead inside. They can eat lead they had during production processes. So we had to stop it because it was bad for the holes. But we pushed a lot in Europe to prevent the utilization of this kind of past in the solar cells manufacturing process. But from historical reason, it was not compulsory to remove it. So that's why I ask you the question. We need to be consistent in our values. So if we want to have eco-design, eco-label, it has to be consistent with the other application of regulation we have that will protect globally the health of European citizens. And that will create another competitive advantage, because if we are strict in the application of our regulation, if we don't give exemption because of the application of various economical forces, we will probably help the European industry to restart and to supply Europe with a basic product, because today a solar panel is a basic product, but we really need the jobs that are linked to manufacturing product. So the development of this eco-design and eco-label also has to be seen as building a competitive advantage for our manufacturing supply chains, without trying to be to create artificial competitive advantage towards competitors all over the world, but to protect our values and what we want to see as standards of the industry. 5 minutes.
Impressive. I was not expecting that. Thank you. Antoine, you are closing the cycle or opening as you want.
Thank you. So my name is Antoine Chalot. I'm the commercial director of Rosie. Rosie, we are a company building a recycling line for photovoltaic modules, end-of-life photovoltaic modules for the French market currently. So I will briefly explain the problem of end-of-life PV panels. So in Europe, we were the first one to install a lot of PV panels. It was more than 20 years ago now, and we see a new wave of waste that is coming to the market, that is end-of-life PV modules. This amount increased very quickly in the past few years, and now we have several countries, for instance, France, Germany, or Italy, that collects more than 5,000 tons of PV modules every year. And that's just the official numbers, because there are good estimations of the overall amount of PV modules reaching the end of life that are much bigger. And the problem is the infrastructure for collection and recycling is not there yet. So in the coming years, we will see a volume of modules reaching the end of life every year of more than 100,000 tons. And that means 100,000 tons is 5 million modules, 5 million modules to collect, to bring to a recycling site and to recycle properly. And the problem is currently only a little fraction is collected, and the treatment that is done is mostly crushing. And when you crush, you recover the frame, the aluminum frame, that's easy to recover. But then if you're good, you recycle it a fraction of the glass, and you lose all the valuable material. So at Rosie, we are this year building the first recycling line, enabling the recycling of the valuable raw materials in PV modules that are embedded in the laminates that are silicon, silver, and copper. And to do that, we have like two main challenges that we can discuss here. First challenge is we need to prove as a recycling activity that we don't pollute the environment, because it's very, very well controlled, the waste management activity. So that means we need to say that we're not rejecting in the environment some toxic materials, and some materials in PV modules can be considered toxic if they are not properly disposed of. Second question is we need to create processes that are enabling the recycling of these valuable raw materials. Our process need to be technically viable, but also economically viable. So the first question we have as recyclers is what information is available about the modules. So for us, having access to information on what is inside the module is very important. First, to prove that our activity is not dangerous for the environment, even though all people agree that recycling is good. And second, to prove that it will be economically viable because we recycle valuable raw materials from this activity. So we believe that in the ecodesign and ecolabel directive, there are ways to help recyclers to have a better vision of what is put on the market in terms of material inside the PV modules. Maybe I stop here and we continue the discussion.
Thank you, Antoine. So let me try to put an open question for all of you in this table that is connected to the previous panel. So all of us, we are sharing the dream of rebuilding the European PV industry. And in the past, we were involved or claim or asking for help from the policymakers in putting trade barriers that have never worked, okay? Which is the role this Ecolabel can play to level the field of play with the ASEANs? And the second question connected to this is up to which level we have to go with this regulation to be sure that we do not suffer a kind of boomerang effect as we have been suffering with the glass or the aluminium that were, let's say, taxed. But I mean, that was a barrier for the people that was willing to produce modules in Europe, but not for the Chinese, for example. So who wants to start first?
Yeah. To start with the example you used last, that's of course important to balance tariffs, that you don't have these kind of effects where you create disadvantages of producing in Europe, and a glass or module frame that's imported as such is taxed or tariffed, while if it is part of a module it isn't, then that's of course a problem. I think it is important to create these kind of level playing fields, and having minimum requirements does that, or giving value to these criteria, like in the French system where there's a value to the CO2 footprint, does that to level the playing field, so that the positive elements that we have in Europe are not a disadvantage, but actually become an advantage in Europe. So that's really important. And if we look at some of the policy proposals, if they are not carefully designed, and if it is, for example, too easy to get an eco label or a green label, then it can actually backfire, and it becomes a problem that everybody can get it, and then it's no value in it any longer.
Thank you. Again, sorry.
The big point is to have a competitive advantage. If this Ecolabel eco-design story give us or even our competitor a competitive advantage, then we will have succeeded. The point is that today we have too low competitive advantages in Europe compared to other countries, but we have our own regulations, and so we just need to apply everything we have already existing just like this REACH regulation, to this specific product to be consistent with these CO2 rules. CO2 content in Europe is lower in electricity, is lower than in the US, in Russia, or in China. That's a fact, and we need to use that as a competitive advantage. The fact that we decided 20 years ago to remove hazardous substances from product that can be sold to individuals has been painful for us, but is today a competitive advantage. So that's regulation. We just need that to be applied also to solar panels. So there is no need for tariffs. There is no need for protectionism. It's not in the roots of Europe. It's not in the way of thinking the economy. So we try to apply these kind of rules, and we failed. And it was easy for players to forget China and to go to Malaysia or elsewhere. So we are not good in that. It's not according to our value. We just need to apply and to be strict in the application of basic rules we already have or will create, but they need to be consistent one compared to the other. That's what I will answer.
Good question, Javier. And unfortunately, I think Ecolabel and ecodesign won't have, on the recycling side of the business, won't have a short-term effect for rebuilding the PV industry in Europe. Why? Because the amount will be very small in the next few years compared to the sales of new PV modules in Europe right now that are increasing a lot. But that doesn't mean it doesn't have an effect, because we need to plan. If we start to rebuild now, we need to have an industry that is more and more competitive over the years. So that means in 10 years, in 20 years, you should get strong advantage of better environmental performances. And when we think ahead, the amount of materials that can be recycled from end-of-life PV modules, wherever they were produced in the first, when they were manufactured, they are in Europe right now. And there are resources for the European industry in the next 10, 20, 30 years. So every Ecolabel or ecodesign points that will help recovering these materials through high-value recycling will help, in the end, all actors in Europe to access these raw materials in the future. And it's very important for silicon production that we have resources in Europe, because we have silicon production in Europe, but we are limited in capacity and we need to import raw materials from other countries. For silver, we produce silver in Europe, but we are importing every year a lot of silver from other countries in the world. And we know that when there is geopolitical tension, at some point, other countries can prevent us from importing these materials, and they can kill an industry like this. We saw that in other industry in the past, and that could be the case with Europe. And at the same time, using recycled material can help us produce new panels with lower environmental impact in the future. And that will be a new competitive advantage for PV modules, but in 10 years, not tomorrow.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if there is people in the audience that wants to formulate a question. Yeah, please.
Thank you for all the presentations. My name is Jäger Waldau from the Joint Research Center. Because the topic came up, rebuilding the European PV industry, I'm now asking a provocative question, because we just heard that LG is closing down because the profit margins are no longer for them of interest. They are talking it's below 15%, so they kill it. To what extent is the European industry willing to build up an industry which might have profit margins which are below 10% for a long-term strategy? I mean, geopolitical, we know that we need it for risk hedging. And what measures would be necessary for the European industry to support this? And the second comment is, yes, a lot of the Chinese industry came into competition, but half of the largest Chinese players are less than 10 years old. And so why does Europe and the United States not have the appetite to invest in this technology?
I can start answering that question. It's of course one thing is the environmental aspects that we are talking about here, which through the right regulation you can level the playing field for that, and that's important. But that's only one small element, and it's an important one. The other element is of course the financing of manufacturing. And that we can see has happened in China in particular. They have 10 years ago realized the strategic importance of PV manufacturing in many ways and build an industry supported by cheap financing, availability of finance. The US is doing something very similar now. Huge subsidies being on the table for building up domestic manufacturing capacity. Sorry, and similarly in India. So this is done because it's of strategic importance, and politicians have realized that. In Europe, we're not quite there yet, and that's something that we are working on. I think some of the recent events have highlighted that it is actually of strategic importance and that we need to do something about it. Processes are a bit slower maybe here, but we clearly need also financial support, both in terms of CapEx financing, but also in terms of OpEx to make it work in the end of the day.
I may. I'm only 15 years of experience of the solar industry in Europe, and I've seen this industry booming and disappearing in the same decades. To answer your question, I will summarize in one word: we need a will. We need the will of political bodies in Europe to make that happen. The way this will made the hydrogen industry appear in Europe, with very challenging moment to come when the electrolyzer will be spread all over Europe and be in competition with Chinese one. We need the will. Europe has been able to materialize in battery industry with this big success you can heard about all over the place. It's not too late for solar. You mentioned LG exiting, but it's the market in the US, not in Europe. My understanding is that they're exiting US. But on the same day, you can read the story of Anwar Qcell. Qcell used to be one of German leader, that they will support the effort in the US to finance with billions of US dollar an entirely integrated solar manufacturing value chain, starting with an acquisition of stake at REC USA for silicon, and they will add ingoting, wafering, celluling, and moduling. So the sole thing we need is the will to make that happen. We still have in Europe, in Norway, fantastic companies able to grow mono ingot that are the top quality in the world. We have in Germany Wacker, which is the best silicon available in the world. You have small people in France able to sew wafers. You have people in Germany, Meyer Burger, able to make very high efficiency solar cells. You have all over Europe, especially in France with Voltaic, module assembly lines in Germany. These skills are still existing in Europe. If we do nothing, they will probably disappear in 2 years. But if there is a will, because there is Ukraine, because there is COVID, then all of that is ready to restart. And with this will, after that, we will need a Marshall Plan that will set the path for the next 10 years and accept to spend probably billions of euros to make that happen. So the will, a Marshall Plan, a financing, and then you will have a solar industry in Europe.
Okay, thank you. I think we are. No, you were. Yeah, please.
Just a small remark on the recycling side. So the recycling activities are used to have low margin, so we will work with that. But no, not joking. The thing with recycling on the long run, when the market stabilized over 10 to 20 years, because that's what we need to have as much waste and a new product on the market, recycling brings the cost down for producing new materials, because recycled materials becomes more and more cheap as the volume grows. And it will be the case with PV recycling. We know it already. With the first steps, we will decrease the cost very, very quickly. And it's a cheaper materials to put back in the industry. And the thing is, if the material is in Europe, it will be used in Europe and not exported, because silicon, except when it's Wacker silicon that you can ship all over the world because it's premium quality, silicon stays in Europe, silver will stay in Europe, copper will stay in Europe. So it will bring cheaper materials to the market.
Thank you. I think we are, let's say, a little bit over time. So I would like to thank all the panelists and thanks all the audience. Sorry for that. And clap. Yep, please.
With Nieves Espinosa. Nieves, do you hear me?
Perfectly. Do you hear me?
Oh, yes, perfectly. So you will have to moderate remotely, which is quite an interesting concept.
Yes, and to physical persons or physical attending and also remotely attending. So it's...
yeah, that's but we are creative now.
Yes,
so
very much.
I give you the virtual floor, and I'm coming back at the end.
Yes, thanks, Gaetan. Welcome everyone to this last panel of the agenda that is focusing on carbon footprint and green procurement. And we do have today a good selection, I think, of panelists that are going to speak about both topics. I will start with Lucas Weiss. He is a material engineer and obtained PhD physics from INSA Lyon, and he worked at the Fraunhofer ISE before joining Voltaic Solar, French company, where he's been appointed CEO in 2020 after different also positions there, including research and development manager. And please, Lucas, the floor is yours to have some, to give some statements.
Yes, thank you, Nieves, and thank you for the invitation. So I will discuss a little bit about my company and about carbon footprints, the topic of this session. So Voltaic Solar is solar module manufacturer, a French solar module manufacturer. We are based in Dinsheim. We are doing design and manufacturing. The company has 12 years today, and we are running a 200 megawatt capacity. Next page. We can see that we are not, normally I should be at this level saying that my company is strong and so on, but we are quite small compared to the market expectation, and we are small, and it is the actual limitation of the European industry. But we are working hard to be bigger and bigger. Since 2015, we have a 30% grow every year in terms of turnover, and we are investing a lot into new capacity. The next, we are working right now on the next expansion at 500 megawatt, and yes. This growth has been possible. We know that it was not so easy for the industry in Europe in the past years, and I think that not every company has this, can present the same growth. It has been possible because we are French on the French market, and we invested a lot of energy into the carbon footprint and the eco-design. So I will now share a little bit what we learn about the carbon footprint and how we handle it. we can go on the next slide. So there is three main levers today on the carbon footprint. Yeah, sorry, the equation is not really this, but it is three main levers to account the environmental impact. There is the quantity of energy which is used for PV module. There is the electricity mix where the products are manufactured, and there is important lever on the quantity of material. So I will detail the three lever quite fast. Regarding the energy, what is important to notice is that there have been a lot of improvements regarding the energy demand to build a PV module. On this graph, we can see that the quantity of energy we are using has been divided by 2 in 5 years. And it is because the quantity of energy is directly cost driven. Actually, most of these improvements were coming also from Asia, and they haven't done this improvement to lower the carbon footprints. They have done this improvement to lower the cost. And so it is quite good news because this means that naturally, because of the cost-driven market, we will reduce also the environmental footprint. It is a good news, but we are also talking. Can we go on the next slide? On non-stop innovation race. Yeah, sorry, I am hiding some part of what is written. This is a red-green paradox, saying that if you stay on the same place, you are just getting you are not running fast enough. And this is an issue regarding the carbon footprint, because if you stay today 2 years with the same process without changing nothing, you will have a higher carbon footprint than your competitor. So you need to reinvest, and this is actually helping companies able to have big investments. So yeah, this is one of the issues of the carbon footprints, and you can also consider the carbon footprint of your production equipment when you need to change all your production line because you change the size. We are actually not accounting this waste into the carbon footprint. Can we go on the next one? The second topic is electricity mix. I won't spend too much time on this. We are more talking about a question of geography. If we are able to produce locally, we will naturally reduce the carbon footprint. And the topic which is, from my perspective, the most important is the question of the amount of material. We are today at change of the scale of the PV manufacturing. We will multiply it by 20 the number of installation, and we are in the source of energy which consume the highest quantity of material per watt. And this will create a new tension on all the raw material at one moment, and we are already experiencing today this tension, and especially in Europe, it becomes really difficult to get components. From my perspective, it is really necessary to be able to reduce the quantity of material into the PV module, and also on the next slide to improve the circularity and to make sure that most of the module or the incoming raw material are coming from recycling, and to be sure that PV module can be recycled, fully recycled. So that was my point on the environmental impact. We have seen the topic of the energy demand, which which will naturally go down and which is going down very fast. The topic of the electricity mix linked to the geography, and the topic of the amount of material, which should be, from my perspective, the main driver for the next regulation. And thank you.
Thank you, Lucas. I understand that that is natural for you to reduce the carbon footprint, but what will be the administrative burden if carbon footprint thresholds are becoming mandatory? And let's hypothetically imagine that it will be similar to those proposed in France, to have some numbers in mind.
Yes. Sorry, your question was what would be the best?
No, if mandatory thresholds are in place, is it a big burden for manufacturers, not only for voltaic solar, but in the industry? How do you see it?
Yeah, it is really complicated to put a threshold today on the carbon footprint. We can see it in France because it could limit entry, and also the threshold will never last very long due to the improvement of the technologies.
I see. Thank you. I think we can maybe give some more, ask some more questions regarding that to Pierre Gall. Welcome, Pierre. You with us? Yes.
Well,
so Pierre
yes.
comes from ADEME, the Agency for the Ecological Transition in France, where he's been technical advisor since February 2020. And please, Pierre, the floor is yours for giving some statements.
Yes, thank you. So I'm sorry, I don't really have some visual slides to share.
Never mind.
But yeah, the idea I think is to speak about the carbon footprint criteria in France, and especially in the call for tenders. And so how do we make it, and how can we evaluate the efficiency of this criteria? So maybe I will just start with explain a bit what we do and how we do it. So basically, I'm going to focus to the call for tenders, because now there is also since recently the criteria in the feed-in tariff, but it's really recent, so we don't really have any feedback about that. So I'm going to focus on the call for tenders. So basically, there is in the call for tenders, there is the carbon footprint criteria that accounts for 16% of the global evaluation of the project. Basically, for a manufacturer, a module manufacturer, to be able to apply for the market of the call for tenders, they have to certify their modules, and to do so, we have two scales of certification. First, every manufacturers that want to enter the market have to evaluate the carbon footprint of their component and processes of fabrication, and then the modules manufacturer have to add all the sub values to get the global value of the carbon footprint. So basically, to evaluate the values, there is two methodology. The first one is a standardized methodology that basically reflects mainly on the electrical mix carbon footprint of the country of the manufacturer. And this is not a really advantageous methodology. The goal is to give an incentive to the industrial to use the second methodology, which is a personalized one, And basically, we do that with an life cycle analysis. So the manufacturers of each component and processes have to order or make life cycle analysis with in situ data, for example, the electrical consumption or the water consumption, and etc. Then there is a second entity that is making a critical review of the life cycle analysis of this of the DLCA, and then we have in our part a neutral entity which evaluate both the LCA and the critical review in order to validate the values. So this is how we make it for the sub processes and component, and then for the end of the chain, basically there is an entity that controls every certification and give the certificate for the modules to be able to apply in the call for tenders. Well, so I think that you wanted also me to talk about how we can evaluate the efficiency of this methodology. Well, firstly, I would say that we are constantly adapting and modifying the procedure to be able to optimize it in a way, because firstly, there is always a lot of evolution in the industry, so we have to take account on that. But we can say that at least that there has been two major impact. That is the sourcing of some industrials, for example, the use of Norwegian component in order to decrease the global carbon footprint. And also, and I think this is also really important, it gave an incentive for the industrial to optimize their processes. And after some exchange with industrials manufacturers, they often said that to us that they pushed them to optimize and to, for example, increase the fraction of the recycled component, for example, the polysilicon or component like that. And I would like to add a last thing is that for now, only France and South Korea are applying this kind of criteria. But if more countries would apply this criteria, I think the incentive and the effect, the impact on the industrial would be really more effective, and that would be a really good sign for the industry.
Thank you, Pierre. I think you just answered the question. In the preparation we talk about some possible points of attention, and I think you just replied it. So let's go with Tom Romans. He comes from Vito, the Flemish research organization. Tom, the floor is yours.
Is this working? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for having me here today. So my name is Tom Romans, as you said, working for Vito. And so I'm going to talk here today from my experiences, basically from two projects I've been involved in. Next slide, please. Which had to do with the PV sector as a whole. The first one is Circusol. It's your Horizon 2020 project. I'm the coordinator of this project, and it's running to its end, so we can start talking about conclusions and lessons learned. The whole idea for this project, which is on circular business models for the solar power industry, this whole idea came from the conclusion that we all know that we will run into a waste problem within a couple of years, most probably, and that is just because of the success, of course, of the solar industry in Europe, or at least the installation of solar panels in Europe. So we know there's going to come a whole lot of waste. The question is, what are we going to do with that? We're all happy that renewable energy is booming and that we can take advantage of the fact that we can now use this renewable energy. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget that this whole evolution will also bring a problem of losing materials. It has already been mentioned a couple of times, and it comes, well, obviously very clear nowadays. We are quite vulnerable in that respect in Europe. And can we afford just to throw away all these panels, or to recycle them, downcycle them, landfill them in some member states still? Whereas we know that we could do so much more with all these resources. And that was like the starting point from this project. Eco-design could, of course, be part of the solution here. We all know that. But we have seen in the course of this project that there are some solutions nowadays. Solutions ready, like lead-free soldering has already been mentioned as well, or new types of encapsulation techniques, and so on and so on. But what we really need is like a push to apply these things, and a coherent approach and a harmonized approach, at least in Europe, which will in the end also help the recycling sector, or even the reuse sector, to repair, to refurbish panels and to recycle them in a better way. That's a very important conclusion. Talking about reuse, which was also an important part of the project, we have also seen that there's definitely a need for standards for the testing for reuse, because what you see nowadays is that there are some routes towards lower income countries where panels are exported again out of Europe and lost to be maybe reused there for a couple of extra years, but in the end they will be lost on landfills, which are, by the way, not managed very properly in most of these places. Okay, that's two important conclusions from the Circusol project. I can tell you much more, of course, but I won't spend too much time. The second slide, that's a totally different project in Belgium. It's called Resourced. This is really, yeah, from the point of view of the purchaser, that I have some conclusions here, or even the end user who is willing to install these well, green panels. There's a lot of talk nowadays about green public procurement and about circular procurement for PV panels, for example. But what you see in practice, if you are then involved in such a project where you want to purchase circular PV panels, then the question comes, what exactly are we asking for? If you ask the market for a circular PV panel or a green PV panel, well, most of the installers will just give you a story and they will all claim that their panel is the best. So real challenge there is to come with some decent procurement criteria. In France, part of this problem is, of course, already solved, as you have heard a minute ago. And also in South Korea, I hear now there's a similar initiative, but in most of the other countries, of course, there's nothing. It's bare soil, and you have to come with your own interpretation of what should be a circular panel. Well, this project is of course a bit particular. It's a European project again. It has received funds, and the aim is to install a microgrid, a circular microgrid, a sustainable microgrid, also to demonstrate what energy community in Europe could look like in the future. That's another buzzword, energy communities. But yeah, just to make the story a bit short, we tried to come with criteria for green public procurement for the PV installation, also for the stationary batteries, for the wind turbine, and so on and so on. And what we have seen is, of course, that in the market, there's still very, very little awareness about all these things. I know that manufacturers are doing a lot of work on this, and that they are aware nowadays already about things like LCA and bills of materials, and they have an idea of the hazardous substances in their products. But if you go downstream in the supply chain towards installing companies and the end users, they don't have a clue. So in that respect, again, I think Ecolabels could really help to raise awareness, and they could also help these purchasers that want to go into green public procurement, because nowadays they can ask for a label. We've seen EPEAT. I can challenge you, try to find someone with an EPEAT label. Well, try to find an installer who can bring you such a panel. It will be quite difficult in a country like Belgium. So if we have a harmonized approach towards these labels, purchasers will know what these labels are about, and they will be able to ask for them. And if there's some kind of a ranking in these labels, they will also even be able to ask for the best in class of all these labels. So that's my opening note.
Thank you, Tom. I wonder, because you mentioned several times about the PV supply chain and materials. So how important is the role of resource efficiency in decreasing the carbon footprint? So how high is the priority of this resource efficiency?
Well, for me, those are two different goals. And you have nowadays people going for carbon neutral and for a low carbon footprint. You can go for that target, but on the other hand, material use and sustainable materials use is so much more than just being carbon neutral. And so that was also one of the lessons from these projects. Green public procurement, it's so much more than low carbon. What we said to these purchases in the resource project, they don't only have to look into these LCAs or look at the carbon footprint of the panels that are offered, but they also have to ask for good service, for quality, for clarity about the supply chain, and aspects like labor conditions and so on also have been mentioned. So instead of only coming with a criterion on carbon footprint, that was only part of the exercise. We also had criteria on things like service. We asked for a service contract for repairability of the panels. What was the vision on repairability of the installations that they offered? Did they have any vision on dismantling and routes for recycling? Did they know anything about that? Those are all aspects that are equally important if you want to go for a circular system and a sustainable system, and things that are often overlooked. So the whole management during the rest of the life cycle, it's not only the moment of purchasing and the moment of installing these products, which is important, but there's also a whole trajectory afterwards, down to the end of life and the recycling, which has to be taken into account from the start. If you don't do it like that, you can miss a lot of opportunities during the rest of the life of these devices.
Of course, I guess this can be, these other life cycle stages can be captured in the carbon footprint assessment as well. But I want to ask you, the three of you, if the fact of having PEF, product environmental category rules, could help in the calculation of the carbon footprint of PV modules.
Yes, I will take the question.
Yeah, thank you, Lucas.
Yes, it will definitely help since it will be recognized European and worldwide standards. So it goes in the right direction. But you still have to consider that Chinese industry won't last too much until generating low carbon PEFCR. So it will help, but yeah, it may not be the only one solution.
Of course not.
Yes, I agree that the PEFCR, it's very important because it's based on a sound science. It's recognized by the industry, by academia, by the regulators, and it's very important to have this harmonized methods all over Europe, because otherwise I think industry won't be prepared to invest in these kinds of schemes. That's quite obvious.
Definitely. And how many buyers and customers do you see that are interested in these low carbon footprint products? Is it something that customers they want, they ask for?
From my experience, I would say that the interest is very, very low. You won't find, I don't want to spoil the party, but you won't find anyone who is the willingness to pay just to have a green product. It's well, most important thing, especially for PV panels, will be the yield of these devices and their efficiency, degradation rates, quality. People invest in these things and they want a return on investment. That's the first thing. If it's green, well, that's nice to have, and everyone will agree that altogether we will have to move towards more green products in Europe. But you would be very naive to think that you could add just a label to your product and then it will sell itself just because there's a green label on it. I think we've tried that already and it doesn't really work on a large scale.
Yeah, I don't fully agree with it. There is interest and many people come to us and ask for low carbon products until they see the price and then they go to change products.
That's what I mean when I say the willingness to pay is low. Everyone thinks it's great until you say that it would maybe cost a few percentages more, and then yeah.
Maybe there is a difference between the purchase power of the of the customers, right? Or if we are talking about residential or also large developers and builders of PV systems. But let me also ask you another question, because I think we're running out of time. It's been a very short time for this interesting session, and in general for all the panels. But is it the use of green certificates in order to lower the carbon footprint? Is it the use of these green certificates for lowering the carbon footprint a way of doing it, a way of lowering it, and how much it would increase the cost? Which is the share of the cost, if you've thought about it or calculated, of the cost of a module?
Yeah, I don't have so much experience with it in France. The market is more based on the low carbon footprint. Is more the tender market, and yeah, I have no knowledge if they can use the two models together.
Yeah, and I don't know if I have fully understood the question. You mean green certificates to prove that you're using green electricity in your production
and
system?
Then you're lowering the electricity mix of the location, since you can use location specific data for calculating the carbon footprint. If you are located, the production is located in a with a polluting energy or receiving a polluting energy mix, then you can buy green certificates in order to lower it. And if you have any experience.
Yeah, I think that the Chinese module are considered like green since it is solar energy. and it is enough to say that it is green. So you don't necessarily need a lower carbon footprint module for the certificate.
Well, I had heard that in order to fulfill these French tender, I mean the criteria in the French tenders, there were some manufacturers that were in need of buying green certificates. So that's really something that has happened.
Yeah, maybe Pierre has the answer, but I think that they can't use for the LCA the green certificate. It has to be production data.
Okay, I think we lost Pierre, so he wouldn't answer. I don't know if we can also give the floor to the audience in physically there, Gaetan, or if we're running out of time, then you want to close the session.
We have 5 more minutes.
I cannot hear you.
5 more minutes.
5 more minutes. Okay, great. Okay, so, but yeah, I had some more Pierre's on the verification, some more questions to Pierre on the verification of the manufacturer's claims. But maybe we can also go on to direct a question again to Lucas on the production. So, which are the effects of the design and production that you've been facing? Can you share with us some details in order to reach these ultra low carbon footprint modules that you claim you have?
Yeah, you in order to reach the lowest possible carbon footprint, you definitely need to have a comprehensive approach. So you need to do a complete LCA over the complete value chain. You definitely need to source low carbon products like a wafer made in Norway. That's a very good way by Northern. So the sourcing is very important, and you also need to act on transports on and at the factory level on use of renewable energy. You need also to have a control on your waste, on your defect rate, and so on. So it is a complete approach that you need in order to reach the lowest carbon footprint. And from my point of view, it is one of the biggest success of this French strategy to have given to some producer this will to do the work better.
Tom, can you share also some more details of the conclusions of the Circusol project with regard to the reparability of PV modules? Because this is something, I mean, they have in principle low reparability.
Yeah, well, what I would like to highlight here is that we have done an interesting exercise for the IEA, the International Energy Agency. We made a report on environmental and financial feasibility of reuse, or longer use, or fulfilling the technical lifetime of a PV panel. So there, the case that we have checked is whether it makes sense from an environmental perspective and also from a financial perspective to repair panels in a large installation and even to decommission part of a large installation to be reinstalled in another location. And there we took the case, an installation that stays for 30 years in use, and you compare different scenarios. One scenario where you would replace part of the installation with newer, more performant panels after 10 years. So every 10 years, then another scenario where you would do that just once in these 30 years after 15 years. And then another scenario where you use just the same old panels for their whole lifetime of 30 years. Because often you have this argument that by replacing older panels after a shorter period by new and more efficient or more performant panels, you would offset the additional carbon, for example, that goes into the production of these more efficient panels, just because those will have a higher yield in the end. But we have seen, so from an environmental perspective, that it really makes sense, and that the environmental impact per kilowatt hour produced over these 30 years is always lower if you just use the same panels for their whole technical lifetime. So just replacing part of the installation for the sake of environmental performance, that doesn't really make sense. It makes sense to try to keep panels in use for as long as possible. And so repairing in that respect also makes sense, and the additional environmental impact of repair is negligible compared to the environmental gains. From a financial perspective, that's a different story, of course. That's more difficult, and there we have seen in the end the conclusion was that repair and reuse, so selling second life panels on the market, it only makes sense for quite young early loss panels. Once panels have an age of 4 or 5 years, that really doesn't make sense, because again, the willingness to pay for these older panels, even though it would be for the sake of circularity, that it's just not high enough, and you would have the costs for repair and revision would be too high. So
okay, thank you. Interesting conclusions. And just a yes/no question for Lucas: do your products have environmental product declaration, where we can check this low carbon footprint?
Yes, so we have a specific certificate for the French market called ECS for simplified carbon evaluation, and we have an additional EPD, but a kind of French EPD, which is used on the French system for the buildings. And then we are also working to have the new EPD Norwegian version, since it may become the next standard.
Okay, thank you very much. I think with that we can close this panel and give the word to Gaetan, that I think is already there. I don't see him.
Thank you.
I'm here, but I'm hiding.
Now I can see you.
So I've seen in the agenda that I'm supposed to speak during 10 minutes. So I will reduce that by a factor 10, if you don't mind. If someone is opposing, raise your hand. So I first would like to thank all speakers, but also the organizers, the PV Impact Project, ESMC, for the support. And I think it will be extremely interesting to continue the discussion in the coming months and years, because we see year after organizing workshops on the subject and studying the subject, that companies start really to own the concept of making products greener. And I think there is a real potential for supporting European industry, starting from all the elements that we have discussed today, starting with eco-design, carbon footprint, but without limiting technology innovation. So there are some progress to be done also in the understanding of what we would like to do. Thank you for your attention, and have a nice end of afternoon and evening in Brussels.